guys for allowing me this opportunity to share space with you. My name is Akram Azimi, and like you, I'm a student at UWA. I have been for the last 8 years, and still an undergrad. Full-time undergrad for 8 years. That takes real talent. It takes real talent not to graduate. I've avoided the real world for a very long time, and unfortunately the real world kind of sucked me up, and now I have to be in the real world. I have to leave the soft bosom of university. I have a little office just down in the anthropology room, and for the last 3 years that has just been my home. That is where I've slept. Don't tell the Vice Chancellor, right? All the security staff. So it was really strange to be pulled out of this very warm, safe space and into the real world. And I was quickly confronted with a lot of issues. I was running these things, and yeah, to be honest with you, they don't really teach you how to run stuff in academia. In fact, all they teach you is really just stuff to put in your head, and that's about it. Nobody actually teaches you what to do with it. And this kind of hit me back a few years ago, actually about 5 years ago. I realized we were doing everything. We were being taught how to read case law. We were being taught, I worked on cadavers in UN biology. We were taught how to do case analysis, but nobody ever really taught us how to do relationships. Nobody ever taught us how to do conflict resolution. So a friend and myself just had this crazy notion, hey, why don't we start a club that just teaches people that? So I said, okay, let's do that. And kind of, it was a pretty poor effort on my part in terms of leadership, really bad. Like I ran that thing so badly. You thought your committees are bad, right? You should have been on that. No agendas, right? No meetings. We were terribly disorganized, and it ended up failing really badly. It all kind of fell apart, and a lot of people were very disappointed in me. So that was my first leadership experience. Crash and burn. Yeah, thanks. From there, I just realized I gotta think about this in a better way. And I realized the first problem I had with that leadership exercise was it had all been about me. It was Akram's project, it was Akram's thing, right? Everything had to have my name down the bottom, right? It was just really bad. And what I was really doing, and you might see this around, is I was searching for myself in my tasks. And that was an incredibly unhelpful thing to do. And I've been thinking about this for a little while, and you really got to ask yourself the question, why are we doing this? Why would you want to be in a leadership position? To be honest with you, it's no fun. You are 90% of the time you're just chasing people and hassling them for stuff. And 10% of the time you're actually doing stuff. So what does it take for someone to take on a leadership position? I've come to realize you've got to know the why. You've got to know why it is you're doing it. And it's not a good enough reason that you're doing it for yourself. And that's what I'd done with my first leadership project. I wanted to do something that would be about me, and that crashed and burned. With this new project that I've started, I started with the proposition that this cannot be about me. What happened? It cannot be about me. Indeed, come to the realization that if you approach life in that way, it actually helps a lot. Start with the proposition that this is not about me, and go so far as to say that my life is not about me. Now, when you start from that position, suddenly everything clarifies itself quite well, because our ego has this way of giving us this frost-tinted lens. Suddenly everything becomes murky. So the first thing I realized, and this is something I'll tell you guys, please see how you can remove yourself from the situation. What does it look like now? What if the situation before you was not about you? And then the second thing hit me. Well, if it's not about me, then what am I really doing here? And then I realized it is not in the satisfaction of my rights or wants or desires, but rather in the fulfillment of my obligations that I'm finding satisfaction. That was another crazy idea, because we're told so often that, go out there and get what you want, and they'll make you happy. I tried that, and it really doesn't. I tried for the HD thing. That makes you happy for about 5 minutes, I've come to realize. About 5 minutes, somebody's nodding, yeah. If you're lucky, 5 minutes. Usually it's about 3, 4. So what is it really about what we're doing here? Why is this important? This is important because we're getting something deeper than just excitement. We're getting something a little bit deeper. I like to call that self-worth, because I've come to the realization that our self-esteem is intimately tied in with our notion of community esteem. It is through self-esteem, right? It is through self-esteem that we have that sense of contentment right here. That's also a sense of fulfillment. And it's only when we're in service to others that we find that. So really, self-esteem is a byproduct of community esteem. And community esteem is created through the kind of work that you guys are doing here on campus right now. So in a sense, a much better reason to start an initiative or take up a leadership position is to realize that you're building community esteem. And that's what you're doing through various different organizations. Sure, it looks good on your CV, but it's not really worth all the effort, all the hassle that you have to go through. So there must be something deeper. So this is kind of how I've thought about why people should approach leadership positions and what is a healthy way of going about it. Now, what do you do when you actually get there? I don't know, I've come to realize that once you get in a leadership position, you should adopt this approach. I don't know if it works for everybody, but it's certainly worked for me. I've thought about it. How can I be forgotten at the end of this journey? Once you're in a leadership position, strive to be forgotten. I've come to adopt an anti-legacy approach. People ask me all the time, what do you want your legacy to be once you leave the post of Young Australian? And I would say I'd love for people to forget about me. I would love for people to realize that they did it themselves. I think Confucius says that, it wasn't me. Don't quote Akram Azimi on it. He said, a good leader is one who at the end of the journey is forgotten by his people, and his people say, we did it ourselves. To give you a good example of this, there's an organization that we're running on campus called I'm the Other. And I've consciously tried to take a back step and let other people speak. Oh no, although I don't really want to. There's a part of me that needs to be in front. It needs to have all the attention. And it's a constant struggle within myself. And Lawrence over there, he would know. I'm trying really hard, but he can probably see the look of struggle on my face in all the meetings when I'm saying, no, you guys should speak, right? I'll just stay back. And he probably sees it on my face, the struggle to be forgotten in every single venture. But now that I've taken this approach, it is so much easier. It is so much easier to deal with the kind of issues that come up. So how does this mentality really help what we're doing on the ground? Well, it makes life a lot easier. Last week, I met the Sheikh of Abu Dhabi, and forgive me for name dropping now, and Bill Gates. It's a massive name drop. And I wasn't really nervous. I really wasn't nervous. I wasn't nervous because it wasn't about me. I was there to deliver my key messages. It wasn't about Akram. It wasn't about Akram impressing anybody, and it wasn't about me getting any kind of attention or recognition. I consciously went in there with that mentality, and I shook his hand, and I delivered my key messages, and I got out of there. And it felt really good, and I still feel really good about it. So I suppose the last thing I've learned about leadership is to stop being an approval seeker and become an approval giver. Because I think once you're in a leadership position, people look up to you and they constantly yearn for that affirmation that what we're doing is okay. And you can do something really bad, which is ask them in turn for affirmation. A leader who's constantly asking for affirmation and approval is one that's going to crash and burn. Twist that on its head. Become the approval giver, and I promise you the consequences of that will just be amazing in your organization, irrespective of what it is you're doing. So all of this is about, what not to do, but what to do. Always lead with the question of why. Always lead with your vision. Because as a leader, that's the only thing you have control over. Because you can't really change anyone. All you can do is present them with a possibility for themselves and allow them to step into that reality. Always lead with a question of why. So I suppose that's the only thing I've really learned in terms of positively learned. I've learned a lot of things not to do, but the only thing I've learned to do about leadership is always lead with the vision. Always lead with the question of why it is you're doing what you're doing. And that why cannot be about you. Oh, can you do this for me because we won like 50 hits on Facebook? Is that inspiring? Not at all. Not at all. It has to be about something greater than ourselves. So always lead with the why and then show your agenda. I wish I had more time to talk to you guys, but I want to leave it open for you to ask me questions.
How do you deal with criticism? I remember when you
Really
when you were first announced as Australian of the Year, I think certainly in the press and amongst those minorities in society, you were subject to quite a bit of criticism, quite public criticism. How have you dealt with that as an Australian of the Year?
To be honest, it's been funny. It's been very personal. Nobody has ever attacked me on anything I've done. I would have loved for them to have done that. But I've got a lot of hate mails, a lot of hate tweets. They come up with these dummy accounts, right? And then they write hateful stuff on my wall. One of my favorites was, "You dirty Arab terrorist slut." I don't know what... I was like, how did they know? But to answer your question more seriously, I think the question goes back to the realization that my life is not about me. My life is not about me. You are free the moment you hold on to and live that truth. I think our culture tells us otherwise. Our culture tells us everything's about us. And if everything's about us, then you can either be in a state of anxiety or purchase everything around you. Doesn't work. So, and also just when you take yourself out of the equation, you see where they're coming from. And often it's from a place of pain. One of the hardest things we can ever ask a human being to do is to look beyond their own pain. For whatever reason, this human being was in immense pain. Because that's the only thing that could explain why somebody would just hate so vociferously. That's the only thing that seems to explain it. 99% of the population has empathy. So it couldn't have been because he was a sociopath, right? Because I've got more than, I've got enough to realize, I've got enough hate tweets and hate mail to know that it couldn't have all been sent by sociopaths, people who have no empathy. This would have been sent by people with empathy. And if it was sent by people with empathy, then there has to be something more going on. There must be some kind of pain that the only answer or the only balm to their pain is abusing me. Some of the other stuff is actually more, this was just stupid, to be honest with you, the example I gave you. Some of the other hurtful stuff was a lot more subtle and by people I knew. One was I was at a party and somebody was saying, "Oh, he's Akram Azimi, the Young Australian of the Year." And then somebody else went, "Oh, you're so lucky to get it, you're barely Australian." That hurt, that really, really hurt. That was, and that was by someone I knew. So it's a funny thing. It's a really, really funny thing. But the question is, I think, even deeper than that. How do you stop yourself from reacting to that kind of pain, to reacting that kind of fear? And you just can't. You can't allow yourself to stoop to that level. You just have to hold onto your values, which goes back to the question of why it is I'm doing what I'm doing. I'm doing it for 3 reasons. I'm doing it firstly because I believe every child deserves to grow up healthy and with the best education possible, irrespective of where they're born. Every young person deserves to find their sense of self and develop a sense of self-worth through community worth. And irrespective of where they're at, and every human being deserves to lead a life worthy of human dignity, irrespective of who they are. So long as I'm doing what I'm doing to pursue those 3 values, right? Doesn't matter what anybody else says. So long as I'm holding on to those values and I'm doing it with integrity, which I define as the equal practice offer convenient and an inconvenient value. Yeah.
Talk about, I guess, sort of how much better it improves things when it's as in a leadership position. It's not about you. How do you deal with other people when it is about them?
How do you not get involved in the ego dramas of others? That's where I think being an approval giver really helps, as opposed to an approval seeker. Because suddenly you're not working from a position of lack. You're not going to that situation with the hope that you get something from them, their affirmation, their approval, and you kind of see it for what it is. You kind of see it for what it is. They feel there is something in their life that they lack, whatever it may be, and they're trying to fill it up in some way through this exercise. And there are ways of letting this person shine and just giving them an opportunity again and again and again. An element of leadership is giving the right space to the right person so as to allow them to shine. And the hope is you just got to trust them. You just got to trust them that one day they'll be able to see beyond themselves. And we all do eventually. I mean, if you have the capacity for empathy, then you have the capacity to see beyond yourself. But it's very hard in a culture that celebrates self-entitlement. It's very hard.
How do you strike that balance between having respect but admitting that you can't solve all the problems and you don't know all the answers to everything?
Yeah, I struggle with that too. I'm actually a terrible manager. Terrible manager. I'm the kind of person that just goes, look, either you do it or I do it, and let's just solve it right now, right? And that's not a very good way of dealing with it. I suspect a much healthier way of striking that balance, right, is to be really, really open and forthright at the beginning, and just admit where you do have that weakness. And a lot of really good research is actually coming out that if you admit weakness in front of everybody in a really confident way, where you admit that you don't know what you're doing, it comes across as vulnerability. And people really respond to vulnerability. If you make yourself vulnerable to someone, you make yourself human. You become relatable. There's actually a lot of respect in that. But if you do the opposite, which is to say, look, and you make something up, you don't acknowledge that weakness, then that weakness actually becomes a form of baggage that you're then going to have to carry around, and it saps strength from you. And people actually lose respect because there's that. I think people can sense duplicity. Do you know what I mean? When we're not being completely forthright. So I kind of think the best way to go about this is just to be vulnerable and open about it, and then trust that they're not going to jump on you and say you're incompetent for it, which is a hard thing. Which is a hard thing, I know. But that's one of the many challenges of leadership. And then it goes back to the first thing I said: why would anybody in their good mind want to be a leader, right? Because it's bloody hard. It's bloody hard. That question, Daniel, striking balance is such a hard thing to do. Such a hard thing to do. You got to find out what are the points of non-compromise in your life are. There's certain things that we cannot compromise on. I cannot compromise with respect to time with mum and time with my girlfriend. Those are those are two people I cannot annoy in my life, right? If I do, everything else falls apart. So they're first priority. Okay? Then comes my social justice stuff and all these stuff that I'm involved with. And there is a lot of people who are relying on me to do certain things, and that's heavy. I've had 2 deadlines today. This is my 5th speaking gig, right? I'm nearly dead on my feet. And then the 3rd one is my studies. So that's the order of importance. And I think that's kind of what you have to do. You kind of have to sit there and go, what is really, really important to me? And for me, it's those 2 women, then the social justice stuff, and then my studies. But don't always do that, because there's a real danger of sacrificing time with those you love for your own pursuits. And I've done that in the past a lot. And there's a great saying, the prophet's family is the last to convert. Have you guys heard that? The prophet's family is the last to convert. And I never quite understood what that meant until I got really busy. And I realized it was because these prophet, or the leader, is always out there doing stuff for other people. And there's a real danger that he neglects his own family. So he's converting the whole town and not spending time with his own family. A great example of it is actually Nelson Mandela. His family really, really struggled. I read his autobiography, Long Walk to Freedom. His family really struggled. His 2 wives really struggled. His kids really struggled. They had to sacrifice a lot. And the problem with that is that they never had a choice. See, he consciously chose to make that sacrifice, but his family didn't. That's why I think Lisa and my mum, that's why I am so much, because they never chose to make the sacrifice. Yeah, so thank you for your question, Daniel. Yeah.
As a leader, if you take yourself out of the equation, does that help you deal with your doubts and worries? Does that help you let go? Can you explain that to us?
Yeah, there's a real power and there's a real stillness to letting go of yourself in that particular situation when you're not looking for yourself in the task. I've come to realize, you let the process take care of itself. Suddenly everything is not contingent on your abilities, on your intellect, on your energy, on your charisma, on your powers of persuasion. Suddenly you can take a step back and everything doesn't have to be about you. And because we're not perfect, because we have so many flaws, I am terribly disorganized, right? Without acknowledging that openly, right, that becomes a source of weakness as opposed to a source of vulnerability. And knowing that and acknowledging that, it kind of helps me take a step back. And I know that's what I can't contribute. I can't contribute logistical support in any leadership endeavor I do. I always have to bring in other people to do that kind of work. So I suppose it just clarifies your perspective when you realize the task before you is not about you. Although the obligation may be yours, you are not the beneficiary of that obligation.